Yeah, so we actually set up a lab there and moved there for a few months. And it was a pretty interesting experience. They were living in the garage, but the folks here are very sensitive. They're very fascially aware people. So the opportunity was to actually work on determine what actually would affect fascia at a deep level with people who were very sensitive. So it's kind of like a cannery in a mine, right?
What do you mean very sensitive?
They're very aware. So like anything that you would try with them, they would feel the last minutia of what you did.
Okay.
Without actually having to it becomes almost like they're like sensors to me trying things. And so anyway, so we built a lab to actually measure the effects of it, but also things that would actually affect fascia. And so we had some hypotheses, and it was wonderful. Like we it was like 9 months of work, but now we have a really good blueprint of understanding fascia and different parts of fascia. And one of the experiments that we did there was related to because the fascia feels safer when there's the fascia feels safe when you're like in for example a flotation tank, because there's less restrictions, so it can expand, right? And the fascia is very good at sensing pressure, internal pressure, external pressure. So we start playing around with pressure and internal pressure and things like that, and that took us into a road of hyperbaric chambers and things and other things which we tested and all that, and it got to a point where we actually then started working with a machine that allowed us to actually do adaptive training, meaning that we could actually control the CO2 and oxygen levels. And lo and behold, it was really interesting. Where I put an individual doing a specific pose and a fascia maneuver pose, and they would have certain restrictions, physical restrictions. Like physically, they couldn't do any more. And what happened was we would then give them CO2, and we get them to actually change the CO2 internally as well, but also CO2, like being able to breathe in through with the CO2, but also doing a breath practice stacked on top of that. And then what we felt is that we actually felt like what they were feeling was that the CO2 and the breath work the CO2 was actually accelerating the movement of the fascia, the activation of the fascia. And then it was pretty cool because afterwards we then hit it up with oxygen, and it went like clearing of restrictions like this. Like literally, like we call it the Mexican lowriders pretzel squat, because it was a pretzel squat. They're squatting, and all of a sudden it's like they can only get so much, and all of a sudden we do the carbon, and all of a sudden oxygen, and it goes like that. And then furthermore, we did things like CO2 through gas, as well as CO2 through consumption through liquids like carbonated water and things like that. And they were very susceptible to the carbonated water, super susceptible to the breathing as well. But we realized that at that time we needed to throttle the CO2 and oxygen mix portion of it, which then took me into the journey of talking to you and reaching out to you, because we had seen something on the Ben Greenfield podcast and mentioning the carbogen generator and the mix. I think it's Medulla's mix.
Yeah, Medulla's, yeah.
Yeah, and anyway, so we were intrigued about that, but we were intrigued about it because we also saw the psychophysiological effects that CO2 would have. Yeah. Which is also fascia. So it's also the psychology aspect of fascia, but the physical aspect of fascia too. And that was super interesting. So I've been doing quite a bit of research on helping people disconnect from the default mode network. So their brain disconnect from the default mode network, which is what entheogen substances like psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca, rapé, and all these other ones do, right? They disconnect you from the default mode network. And what happens is when you do that, your sense of identity and things like that you're holding on to, thinking about the future, past, and all these things, you're no longer that. You're in a state of some other place. And that becomes a bit of rest, right? Getting people disconnected, right? So we were fascinated by ways that we could actually do that naturally, and we're doing that with breath. We're doing it with certain practices. But we were really curious to try, the carbogen, because it was actually being used as a screening tool for psychedelic journeys by Stan Grof in the 60s, right? In the 50s and 60s, right? So it was a screening tool, and people were reporting that they were getting actually more profound experiences from 5 breaths of carbogen than they were from the LSD trip. And so that became super fascinated. So initially we reached out to you for that. And then when we started seeing on your site that you're using carbon dioxide to actually induce using creams and things, and people are getting younger, well, I'm like, yeah, you're spot trimming the fascia right there in their face because you're adding carbon dioxide.